The morning I decided to fill in my backyard swimming pool, I never imagined it would turn my quiet suburban life into a neighborhood battlefield. My name is Marcus, and I've lived at 1247 Elm Street for 8 years now, long enough to know every crack in the sidewalk and every quirk of my neighbors. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what Karen Hendricks from next door would put me through. It all started 3 months after my divorce was finalized. Sarah had taken half of everything, including my motivation to maintain the elaborate backyard oasis we'd built together. The kidney-shaped pool that once hosted our summer barbecues and romantic evening swims now felt like a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Every time I looked out my kitchen window, I saw her floating on that ridiculous flamingo raft, sipping wine and laughing at something on her phone. The chlorine smell that used to mean relaxation now made my stomach turn. The pool had become a liability in more ways than one. My homeowner's insurance had skyrocketed after a neighbor's kid broke his arm jumping off my diving board 2 summers ago. The monthly maintenance costs were bleeding my already strained finances dry. Between the chemicals, the cleaning service, and the heating bills, I was spending nearly $400 a month just to keep it functional. Most importantly, I'd started working from home full-time after landing a remote software development position, and the constant noise from the pool pump was driving me insane during important client calls. But the final straw came on a sweltering Tuesday in July. I was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when I heard the familiar sound of my gate creaking open. Through my office window, I watched in disbelief as Karen Hendricks, my 40-something neighbor with the bleached blonde hair and the permanent scowl, was setting up a lawn chair beside my pool. She'd brought a cooler, a beach umbrella, and what appeared to be enough snacks for a small army. "Excuse me, Karen," I called out, stepping onto my deck. "What exactly are you doing?" She looked up at me with those cold blue eyes, her lips pursed in that expression I'd come to associate with trouble. "Oh, Marcus, I hope you don't mind, but since you never use this beautiful pool, I thought I'd get some sun. It's such a waste to see it sitting empty all the time." The audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't the first time Karen had made herself comfortable in my yard without permission. Over the past year, I'd caught her using my garden hose, picking vegetables from my tomato plants, and even letting her yappy little Chihuahua princess do her business on my perfectly manicured lawn. Each time, I'd politely asked her to stop, and each time she'd give me some excuse about being a good neighbor, or how property lines were just suggestions between friends. "Karen, this is private property. You can't just—" "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "It's not like you're using it. Besides, I'm practically family now that we've been neighbors for so long. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, right?" That's when I knew something had to change. After she finally left that evening, taking her sweet time and making sure to accidentally track wet footprints through my house when she used my bathroom, I sat on my deck with a beer and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I called Thompson's pool removal service. Joe Thompson, a weathered man in his 60s with calloused hands and a no-nonsense attitude, came out that afternoon to assess the job. "You sure about this, son?" he asked, walking around the pool's perimeter. "This is a beautiful setup. Probably cost you $40,000-$50,000 to put in." "I'm sure," I replied, watching Karen's curtains twitch in her kitchen window. She was definitely watching us. "How long will it take?" "Well, we'll need to drain it first, then break up the concrete, haul out the debris, and backfill with soil. Probably looking at a week, maybe 10 days depending on weather. Won't be quiet work, I'll tell you that much." Perfect. If Karen wanted to make my life difficult, she was about to learn that two could play that game. I scheduled the work to begin the following Monday. Over the weekend, I did my research on property rights, noise ordinances, and homeowner regulations. Everything I was planning was completely legal and within my rights as a property owner. I even called the city to make sure I had all the proper permits. Sunday night, as I prepared for the chaos that would begin the next morning, I noticed Karen in her backyard staring longingly at my pool. She was probably already planning her next unauthorized swimming session. The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. Little did I know that Karen had been doing some research of her own. and what she had planned would make my pool removal project look like child's play. Monday morning arrived with the rumble of heavy machinery. At exactly 7 a.m., the earliest legal time for construction work in our neighborhood, Thompson's crew rolled up with a massive excavator, 2 dump trucks, and enough equipment to wake the entire block. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, watching through the window as Joe Thompson directed his team with military precision. The first sign of trouble came at 7:03 a.m. My phone rang, and Karen's shrill voice pierced through the morning air before I could even say hello. "Marcus, what is that noise? What are you doing to your pool?" "Good morning to you too, Karen," I replied, savoring the panic in her voice. "I'm having it removed, completely legal, all permits in order." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds before the explosion. "You can't do that! I have rights! I've been using that pool for over a year. That establishes easement rights." "You can't just destroy community property." "Community property?" The woman had officially lost her mind. "Karen, it's my pool, on my property, and I can do whatever I want with it. Have a great day." I hung up, but the phone immediately started ringing again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By 8 a.m., I had 17 missed calls from Karen. Outside, the real show had begun. The crew had started draining the pool, and the massive pumps were creating a steady hum. That admittedly was pretty loud, but it was nothing compared to the sound that emerged from Karen's house at 8:15 a.m. She burst through her back door like a woman possessed, wearing a hot pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her hair in curlers, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Stop! Stop right now! This is illegal!" Joe Thompson looked up from his clipboard, his expression somewhere between confusion and amusement. "Ma'am, we have all the proper permits. This is completely legal work." "I'm calling the police!" Karen shrieked, pulling out her phone. "This is destruction of community resources. This is terrorism." That's when I knew Karen had officially crossed the line from entitled neighbor to complete lunatic. But what happened next surprised even me. As Karen stood there in her bathrobe, frantically dialing 911, her husband Frank appeared in their doorway. I'd barely seen Frank in the 8 years I'd lived here. He was one of those quiet, keep-to-himself types who left for work early and came home late. But today he looked different, tired, defeated, and absolutely mortified. "Karen, get inside," he called out, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard from him before. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Karen whirled around to face him, her voice reaching a pitch that probably shattered glass somewhere in the neighborhood. "He's destroying our pool!" "It's not our pool, Karen!" The entire construction crew stopped working. Even the excavator fell silent. Frank had never raised his voice, not once in 8 years, but now he was standing in his doorway, in his work clothes, looking like a man who'd reached his absolute breaking point. "It was never our pool," Frank continued, his voice carrying across both yards. "It's his pool, on his property, that you've been trespassing on for months despite me telling you to stop. I'm done pretending this is normal behavior." That's when the first twist hit me like a freight train. Frank wasn't just tired of Karen's antics, he was actively fighting them. As Karen stood there sputtering, Frank walked over to my fence. "Marcus," he called out, "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior, and I want you to know that if you need a witness for anything at all, about her trespassing or harassment, I'll be happy to provide one." Karen's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. "Frank! How dare you!" "I dare because I'm tired of living with a woman who thinks the entire world belongs to her," Frank shot back. Then, turning to me again, he said something that made my jaw drop. "Marcus, I've been talking to a lawyer. Karen doesn't speak for both of us and she never has." The second twist came when Karen actually followed through on her threat to call 911. I watched through my window as she paced her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly as she spoke to what I assumed was a dispatcher. "Yes, this is an emergency. My neighbor is destroying community property. He's..." "What? No, it's not his property, it's... What do you mean, whose name is on the deed? Of course it's his name, but that's not the point. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Karen's voice getting progressively higher and more frantic. I couldn't hear the other side, but I could piece together what was happening from her responses. What do you mean you can't send a car for a civil dispute? This is destruction of property. This is... Hello? They'd hung up on her, but Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. Over the next 3 hours, as the crew worked steadily to drain and begin demolishing my pool, Karen launched what could only be described as a one-woman campaign of psychological warfare. She called the city planning office, claiming I was operating without permits. They confirmed I had all necessary permits. She called the EPA, claiming I was illegally dumping pool chemicals. The crew was disposing of everything properly. She even called the fire department, claiming the construction noise was preventing her from hearing smoke alarms. The third and most shocking twist came at around noon, when a police car actually did show up. My heart sank. Had Karen found some legal loophole I'd missed? Officer Martinez, a patient-looking woman in her 40s, approached me first. Mr. Johnson, I'm responding to a complaint about noise violations. Officer, we're operating within legal hours with proper permits, I began, but she held up her hand. I know, I already checked. That's not why I'm here. She glanced toward Karen's house, where Karen was peering through her curtains. I'm actually here because we've received 14 911 calls from your neighbor in the past 4 hours. 14. Including one claiming you were operating a meth lab in your backyard. I blinked. A meth lab? Apparently the pool chemicals and construction dust looked suspicious to her. Officer Martinez shook her head. Mr. Johnson, I need to ask, has your neighbor been harassing you? And that's when I realized that Karen's plan to use the authorities against me had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Her repeated, increasingly ridiculous 911 calls had actually triggered a harassment investigation against her. Officer, I said, I think we need to have a longer conversation. What happened over the next 2 hours was beyond anything I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. Officer Martinez didn't just take my statement. She conducted what amounted to a full investigation into Karen's pattern of harassment, and what she uncovered was both shocking and oddly satisfying. Mr. Johnson, Officer Martinez said as we sat on my back porch, her notepad filling with details, I need you to understand that what you're describing isn't just annoying neighbor behavior. This is documented harassment, trespassing, and now, abuse of emergency services. As I recounted months of Karen's entitled behavior, the unauthorized pool use, the garden theft, the property violations, Officer Martinez nodded grimly. But the real bombshell came when Frank appeared at my back gate, carrying a manila folder that looked suspiciously official. Officer, Frank called out, I have something you need to see. What Frank handed over was a collection of photographs, videos, and written documentation that he'd been secretly compiling for months. There were pictures of Karen in my pool without permission, videos of her berating delivery drivers who couldn't find her house and directing them to use my driveway instead. And most damning of all, recordings of her phone conversations where she discussed her rights to my property. I've been documenting everything, Frank explained, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. My wife has become unhinged. I kept hoping she'd come to her senses, but after today... He gestured toward Karen's house, where we could see her pacing frantically back and forth past her windows. I can't enable this behavior anymore. The fourth twist hit when Officer Martinez revealed just how spectacular Karen's 911 abuse had been. Mr. Johnson, in addition to the 14 calls today, we have records of your neighbor calling emergency services 47 times in the past 6 months. 47 times. For what? I asked, stunned. Officer Martinez flipped through her notes. Suspicious activity, which turned out to be you checking your mail. Noise violations, which were you mowing your lawn at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Property damage, which was actually you trimming branches on your own tree that hung over her fence. And my personal favorite, a bomb threat. A bomb threat? Frank and I said simultaneously. She called claiming you had explosive devices in your garage. When officers investigated, they found a leaf blower and some leftover 4th of July fireworks from 2019. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to process. But the biggest twist was yet to come. At around 2 p.m., just as the construction crew was breaking up the concrete pool deck with jackhammers, another police car arrived. This time it wasn't alone. A black sedan followed, and out stepped a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. "That's Detective Sarah Chen," Officer Martinez explained. "And the woman with her is from the district attorney's office. Your neighbor's behavior has escalated this into a criminal matter." Karen, apparently seeing the additional law enforcement, decided this was her moment to make her stand. She burst out of her house, now dressed in what appeared to be her Sunday best, complete with pearls and a hat, and marched directly toward the group of officials. "Finally!" she announced loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "I've been waiting all day for someone to take this seriously. I demand that man be arrested immediately for destroying community property and operating an illegal business." Detective Chen looked at Karen with the expression of someone who'd seen it all before. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Chen. We're actually here to speak with you about your repeated abuse of emergency services." Karen's confident smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what?" "You've made 61 false reports to emergency services in the past 6 months. That's a Class A misdemeanor in this state, punishable by up to 1 year in jail and fines up to $4,000. The color drained from Karen's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. "False reports? I haven't made any false reports. Every single call was legitimate." That's when the DA representative stepped forward with her briefcase. "Mrs. Hendricks, we have recordings of your calls, including the one from this morning where you claimed your neighbor was operating a meth lab because he was removing his swimming pool. Well, the chemicals, they could have been..." Karen's voice grew smaller with each word. "We also have the call where you reported a bomb threat because your neighbor owned a leaf blower," Detective Chen continued. "And the one where you claimed he was running an illegal business because UPS delivered a package to his house." But the coup de grace came when Frank stepped forward with another folder, one I hadn't seen before. "Officers," Frank said quietly, "there's something else. My wife has been documenting her own activities. She keeps a journal." Karen's eyes went wide with panic. "Frank, you can't. That's private property." "Actually, Karen, it was sitting on our shared kitchen table. The same kitchen table where you planned your daily harassment campaigns." Frank opened the folder and pulled out a spiral notebook. "She's been tracking Marcus's schedule, planning when to use his pool when he wasn't home, and..." He paused, looking genuinely pained. "She's been researching ways to claim adverse possession of his property." The final, most spectacular twist revealed that Karen hadn't just been an entitled neighbor. She'd been actively plotting to legally steal my property through squatters' rights laws. Her journal contained detailed notes about property law, calculations of how long she'd need to establish residence, and even sketches of how she planned to expand her pool area into my vegetable garden. "Mrs. Hendricks," the DA representative said, opening her briefcase, "you're being charged with harassment, trespassing, abuse of emergency services, and attempted fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As they read Karen her rights, the neighborhood had gathered to watch. 8 years of Karen's entitled behavior had affected everyone on Elm Street, and I could see relief on faces I'd never spoken to before. Mrs. Patterson from across the street actually started clapping. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when the construction crew, who had been respectfully quiet during the police investigation, fired up their equipment again. The sound of the jackhammer breaking up the last of my pool concrete served as the perfect soundtrack to Karen being escorted to the police car. Frank approached me as the car pulled away. "Marcus, I want you to know, I'm filing for divorce. I should have done it years ago." He looked at the construction site, then back at me. "What are you planning to put in where the pool was?" I looked at the space where my pool used to be, thinking about new beginnings and fresh starts. "I'm thinking a vegetable garden, maybe a workshop, something productive." Frank smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. That sounds perfect. And Marcus, if you ever need to borrow a cup of sugar or use a garden hose, you're welcome anytime. 3 days later, my pool was completely gone, replaced with fresh soil and infinite possibilities. Karen was released on bail but had a restraining order preventing her from coming within 100 feet of my property. Frank had filed for divorce and was staying with his brother while he looked for his own place. And me? I was standing in my backyard, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over my newly reclaimed space, finally understanding what it meant to have peace and quiet in my own home. The best part? My homeowner's insurance dropped by $200 a month. I was saving $400 in pool maintenance, and I'd discovered that the entire neighborhood had been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to Karen. Sometimes, the best revenge really is just living well and knowing your property rights.